Welcome to the summit. What is the wisdom of silence? And I can now introduce you to Solomon Katz. Hi.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. And we're going to be talking about your book, your latest book, and you have it right there to show.
Yes, the first book is Beauty as a State of Being. And the second book is Where Thoughts and Stories End.
Yeah, and so you have a master's in the world religions, and you have a PhD in psychology, and you're a psychologist, and you're also an author. And what you focus on is this transpersonal, is beyond the person. And that's what silence, that's how I see silence, the wisdom of silence. This silence that we are. And yeah, what is this wisdom of silence?
Well, speaking from a psychological perspective, from the people that I work with, everyone's mind is noisy. And that noise comprises the ego and the state of dilemma, because the noise of the mind is usually all about problems, dilemmas, the dilemmas of life. And that also constitutes suffering or discomfort or agitation. And so when I work with people, everyone comes with some degree of agitation, which again amounts to the contents of the mind. Now, silence, which is entering into the realm of meditation, is about going beyond the silence of the mind, the problems, the dilemmas, and touching or tasting beauty, or you could call it God or the sacred, but you don't touch the sacred unless the mind and ego becomes quiet. And then the fullness of the sacred can emerge. The mind and its busyness is like static that distorts the clear, ever-present broadcast of silence and the sacred. So in order to touch that, in order to see that beauty, the mind has to become quiet, because the mind is the thing that distorts or obscures that beauty.
Yeah. Yeah, so the beauty is already there. Our source, our true nature is always there. That's what we always are. It's like the eternal truth of what we are. And somehow we don't notice it because of the thoughts, and we believe them, and then suddenly a whole person is made out of this that doesn't even really exist in that way, right? It's just beauty acting out through a body. It's beauty in the world. It's all one, you could say, that's seen through our eyes, and that one is called different things like God or consciousness or awareness or presence, but or Allah or Brahman. And so like in your book, you also mentioned Atman is Brahman, right? It's also that, and it's non-duality. So it seems like we're already it. How come we not experience that beauty? How can we not just be it all the time? And is it really just the mind and the thoughts? Is that?
Well, it depends on what you're paying attention to. I've been saying to people lately, pay attention to what you pay attention to, because what we usually pay attention to is in that book, in Where Thoughts and Stories End, which is the title indicates that state, where thoughts and stories end, which is the state of silence. But we're not paying attention to that. Attention is not turned in that direction, which you could say is the inner direction. Attention is turned outwardly towards the world. And so we overlook the sacred in favor of the desires, the stories that we're very deeply engaged in. And so the depth of our engagement in all of those stories and desires and problems, well, that's where what we attend to. So we're not paying attention to what we could call God or silence or the sacred. We're not, in some level, interested in it. We're more interested in other things. So those other things occupy our attention until you recognize that those other things don't fulfill, they don't quench the thirst of the soul. The only thing that will quench the thirst of the soul is that which is eternally giving, is eternally present. All the things that we look to outwardly cannot quench the thirst of the soul because they're impermanent. But what is permanent is the seeker, him or herself, is the source of the search. You know, you mentioned Atman as Brahman. I mentioned that in my first book, and I got some flack from people who identify as Christian. So I will use Saint Francis of Assisi, who the present Pope, Pope Francis, took his name from, who has a quote that goes, I've heard different expressions of it, but one of it is, the one you are looking for is the one who is looking. Or what you are looking for is what is looking. In other words, we are looking for something. We're looking for peace, happiness. We look outwardly. But what he is saying is that the source of the inquiry is what you are in fact looking for. You're looking for yourself, that which is eternally giving, but you don't recognize that. You look outwardly, and the outer does not satisfy the soul.
Yeah, so it's not the outward going mind, it's the inward, like, and that's also in your book, the famous quote, "Be still and know that I am God." And you also the Four Noble Truths from Buddhism, and so you describe different religions, you could say, or what they're pointing to. So that's nice also to see it in the bigger picture, but it all comes down to, it points to the heart, right? That's also what you mentioned, the heart of silence, you could say, the sacred, the one that's quiet, the one that's still, and that's where you're fulfilled. And I'm wondering if I'm just silent and all my thoughts will still, I mean, I cannot stop my thoughts. I know there's this no thinking possibility that you also write about. But how can I not think at all? You know, they say we have 60,000 thoughts going on, and how can I, or is it more not relating to the thoughts, and then they'll just kind of slow down, they'll be fewer, or how do you do it?
Well, you know, Ramana Maharshi said that the entire path is contained in that phrase from the Psalms, "Be still and know that I am God," because that's it, be still, and then you taste God, then you grow closer to God. Not that God was ever distant, but the stillness was not available because the mind was busy. So how do you do it? Pay attention to what you pay attention to. Thoughts arise and we pay attention to them. And thoughts are all about the outer world, or dilemma or problem or seeking or desire. But when we pay attention to thoughts, we're neglecting what could be said, our devotion to truth. So the devotion to truth has to be very great. so that when thoughts arise, you notice them, and eventually this becomes second nature. But let me continue. When thoughts arise, you notice them, and you don't energize the thought. You don't get involved in the thought. In Ramana Maharshi's method of self-inquiry, you ask, to whom does the thought arise? You don't entertain the thought. You notice the thought and you say, well, who's thinking this? I am. And you come back to the source of the thought, the pre-thought state. But dedication has to be very great to quell the ego. The mind and the ego are the same. The thoughts, the mind and the ego are the same. When the thoughts arise, rather than energize those thoughts by giving them attention, return attention to its source, and then the thoughts just disappear. But as practice progresses, as one progresses along the path, an example that I use in the first book is the example of a skier. Someone who has very good balance in skiing can go over very steep terrain, very difficult terrain, and they don't lose their balance. So in the same way, as attention becomes anchored in the heart, when thoughts arise, which is to say you're about to lose your balance, you're about to sort of start chasing something, you notice it and you correct. And that correcting becomes second nature. It becomes like muscle memory. So thoughts arise, you notice it and you correct. You try not to become involved in the thought. In Ramana's method, it's self-inquiry. You always ask, to whom does the thought appear? Not the thought, not involvement in the thought, but to whom does it appear? You return to the source of the thought. And that, we could say, is the state of balance. So mastery of this sort is the ability to remain in the state of balance, even when life with its pressures wants to activate the mind and its thoughts and its reactions. You notice it and you hold on to your state of balance. Because losing your balance does not feel good. So you notice, even at a subtle level, that you're about to start chasing something and you put it down.
Yeah. And Ramana Maharshi also said that it's the highest teaching is silence, right? Like,
yes, he would say that his highest teaching was silence, because in his silence, he's a very great master, then the emanation of presence, the silence is full. The silence is unadulterated fullness being broadcast from him. The teaching, when he would speak verbally, it's in a sense a lesser teaching for those who are not able to fully appreciate the full broadcast of the silence. But most of us require a lot of instruction. We're not at that stage where we can just recognize the silence and the seeking is ended, because you recognize that's what I've been looking for, is the fullness of the silence. So he would give verbal instruction for most of us who require that. But he would say that that was not his highest teaching.
Yeah, because it's what we are is beyond the words, is beyond the thoughts. It holds all that, it includes all that. So that's why it's hard to ever get it with words. Yet the words can point to what you are, and somehow it can be revealed within you.
Yes, the words for most of us. So Ramana Maharshi would also say, this is known to students of his teaching, that disciples were at different levels of development. Some were like, I believe he said, gunpowder, some were like charcoal, and some are like green wood. So the ones who are like gunpowder, they just need the tiniest spark to get it. They don't need much preparation, much instruction. They just need the tiniest push over the edge and they understand. Those that are like charcoal need more teaching, more instruction, more seasoning before they catch fire, and those that are like greenwood require a lot of teaching and seasoning. So depending on one's stage of development, one requires a teaching at a different level. The silence is appropriate for those who are very advanced, who just need that last little push, and then they understand. But most of us are not at that level. Most of us require a lot of teaching, and actually years. I mean, you know, personally, I did my first 3-month meditation retreat. I think I was 22 or 23. And I've been practicing throughout my life. And it's been a slow process. I quote Suzuki Roshi, who said that Zen was like walking in a fog. It takes a while to get wet, but eventually you're completely soaked. So for many of us, you have to just keep walking in the fog, keep pursuing the path, and you get slowly and slowly, you get more and more gradually soaked, until at some point you're fully soaked. You're steeped in the teaching, you're steeped in the knowledge. But for most of us in the West, it takes a while for that soaking, which is the undoing of the ego, to take place. It doesn't happen quickly for most of us.
Yeah. Yes, because you can't just say, well, okay, all the wise people are saying that the ego is not even really there in the first place. It's just a bunch of stories, and it's a narrator, a commentator, and well, I'm just not gonna care about it. I'm not. Yeah, you're not there. So, okay, I'm free. I'm already it. So there's nothing to do. So in a way, you could say, oh well, it's all good as it is. You know, like there's no journey. I'm already it, but somehow that doesn't seem to work either. Like,
no, because Ramana called them the vasanas, they're habits of mind. There's a residue. I use the phrase, the mind is the residue of the past. So the mind, which is the residue of the past, has momentum. And that momentum, you may say, yes, you may have a glimpse, oh yes, just be still, there's nowhere to go. It's present, I'm it. But that doesn't stop the momentum of the mind turning. That momentum continues to turn. And so the practice is returning to the stillness again and again. The mind wants to turn, and you notice it, you return to the stillness. But the vasanas, the habits of mind, the residue of the past, tendencies of the mind, just because you taste it momentarily doesn't atrophy this momentum. The momentum still continues. That's the continued practice, to stay present. We could say, from a devotional sense, to keep your attention on God, to keep your attention on truth, and not to energize the thoughts and stories, which will continue to come until they're exhausted, until that momentum is fully exhausted. That, we could say, is full mastery, complete enlightenment. There's no more momentum, there's no more karma pushing the mind, pushing us forward. You're just abide in stillness, and there's no more momentum to the ego.
Yeah, so that's the journey, you could say, is all the undoing, it's almost like the whole body has to be in it too. It's not just the mind saying, oh yeah, there's no one, and I'm God, or you know, we all just one, or non-dual. It's also, so it's almost like it's also an experience on the bodily level.
Yes, the body, and so the residue of the past, the mind is the residue of the past. The body also contains the residue of the past. The body has its tensions, accumulations of tension that are the residue of past experience. The body is contracted, the mind is contracted. They both contain all this residue, this leftover from not fully digested previous experience. So the body has to relax, the mind has to relax. I would say one caveat to that. I think the body follows its own course as well. And you will see, even with great masters like Ramana Maharshi, he got cancer. He had, I believe, rheumatoid arthritis as well. So the body follows its trajectory. And the Buddha would always say that, old age, disease, and death are characteristic of life. So the body will decay. There's no way to really prevent that. So that's a separate process. But a lot of the accumulated tension from the past, that can be released to improve the state of the body. But I think, especially as I get older, the body is going to deteriorate. We see that even with great masters. Ramana died of cancer. Suzuki Roshi died of cancer, as I mentioned earlier. Ramana Krishna died of cancer. Ram Dass had his stroke. John Klein had a stroke. Great masters all become ill and die because the body is subject to its own trajectory.
Yeah, but it's the mind that you can really you can silence, because you're not even this ego in the first place.
The ego is the belief in the mind as real. So if thoughts come up and I'm the thinker of the thought and I involve myself in the thought process, then there's this impression that the thoughts and the thinker are real. But when I take a step back, when I observe the thoughts and I don't involve myself in the thoughts, then the thoughts lose their power. And so then the ego loses its power. And what's left is just observation, being, within which thoughts may arise, but there's no involvement in, or there's no investment in the thought. The thought comes up and the bubble bursts. So pay attention to what you pay attention to. If I pay attention to the thought and I enter into the thought, if attention enters into the thought, then there is this impression of I as an ego who is thinking, who is doing. But when attention stays home, when it doesn't involve itself and so energize and move the story along, then it just comes and goes without impact. And what remains is just the presence within which the thoughts and everything else arises.
Yeah.
The problem is identification with and entering into the thought process, and now you're in the domain of the ego.
Because even like this artist, they also had an ego, you could say, or not an ego, but they had thoughts happening. They took action. That's almost like that's programmed in us through living a life. So
yes,
it happens automatically. And
yes, the mechanism operates. It's fine that the mechanism operates. Thoughts come up. I need to pay my bills, or I need to do whatever I need to do. I need to call the plumber. Thoughts come up. It's part of the operation, but there's not necessarily the personal involvement. It all comes up. It's fine. It's good. And you abide in the heart as all of this arises. The mastery, the development, spiritual development, is really the ability to abide in the heart and be in the place of love, the nature of the heart, while all of this unfolds. Calling the plumber, voting, being involved in politics, or whatever you may be involved in, but you do it from the perspective of the heart. You don't lose your balance and get too involved. The thoughts and stories, the worldliness. That's where suffering arises. You're back in the mind, you're back in dilemma, you're back in worldliness. You've lost the purity of the heart. You've lost your balance. The objective is to stay in the heart, to stay balanced, and to act and allow action to take place from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is our nature. And then before we fell, the fall that you write about, but you can come back, right? You can come back to your heart.
Well, the way that you know it's your nature is that's where you feel best. That's where you recognize the end of suffering. It's like, oh yes, of course. Um, I say in the first book, when you break your arm, it hurts because it's broken. If it's not broken, it doesn't hurt. So suffering is an indication, is a symptom that something is out of alignment. And when you recover alignment, or to the degree that you recover alignment, the suffering abates, and you recognize, oh yes, this is how I want to feel. This is how I was meant to feel. This is my true nature.
Yeah.
I lost my balance. I got involved in stuff foolishly that was a distraction.
Yeah. And that's also, so when you kind of feel happy and joyful, and like you can also let that guide you to, okay, I'm in alignment with myself. It's like feelings that are really not comfortable, and then you're out of alignment. Then it's kind of a sign that you may not really be in alignment with your heart.
Yeah, so emotional symptoms tell you that you're picking up some story, and you're getting involved in it, and the feeling of comfort or discomfort is telling you that you're going off track, you're losing your balance. It's true of the body as well. When there's pain in the body, as I was saying earlier, it's an indication that something in the body is out of alignment. Some of that we can repair, some of that we cannot repair. I mean, then the body dies. So the pain and suffering are both indications that something's out of alignment. We can't always fix the body, and the body may involve pain, may include pain, but the mind we should try to keep in alignment, in the place of comfort and acceptance and presence as much as possible, and then we are able to avoid emotional suffering.
You're in alignment with truth, which is also love. It's open, it's unconditional, right? It's spacious.
Yes, that's the nature of the heart. When thoughts and stories end and you return to yourself, when you're in that state, be still and know that I am God. That's the whole path. Be still, drop the ego, drop the stories, and then taste your true nature, which we can call God.
Yeah. And you also talk about the God hypothesis, like the what is that?
I'm saying for people who might read the book that let's propose that God is the truth. This is the hypothesis. Let's propose that God, nirvana, is the truth. What does that look like? What are the propositions that articulate that truth? So that chapter, I'm saying this is what it looks like when we accept that God is the fundamental reality and the truth that we're all looking for. This is what it looks like.
And what does it look like?
I have it here, I could read it, but it's something like, I'm going to read it because I won't. I think the chapter ends with this quote. In this world or the next, you will not know any light other than the light of your own being. In this world or the next, you will not know anything other than that which the light of your being illuminates. Therefore, the light of your being is the ultimate reality. So it's saying that the light of your being, the light of being, the light which illuminates all things, is the ultimate reality. Without that, there is nothing. Without the light of consciousness, there is nothing to be conscious of. So the light of consciousness is the ultimate reality. Again, because without that, it's lights out. There is nothing. So the light of being, the light of consciousness is the ultimate reality. It is that light that brings the universe and all experience into being. That light is the ultimate reality. And that light, John Klein calls it your nearest. It's closer than close. It's the light of your own being. The light which lights up the universe and all experience, consciousness, is closer than close. It's your nearest.
Yeah, is what this is. Everything is, right?
Everything is that without that, there is nothing. Without the light of consciousness, there's nothing. There's no consciousness. The absence of consciousness is nothingness.
Yeah.
But the God hypothesis is also that that light of consciousness, that nothingness is not really a thing. That consciousness, or the light of being, is the eternal reality, the eternal light. And that's also the God hypothesis, that God, that the light of consciousness is the ultimate reality. There's no, nothingness is not really an alternative for there to be nothing. Philosophers have asked the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there a light of consciousness and not nothing at all? But I go into that in my first book. I could now if you want, but I'm saying that the reality is that God, that the light of consciousness is what's real, and that nothingness doesn't really exist. It's not an option. Because for nothingness to exist, there would be nothing at all. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the nothingness is full, and it's that fullness that we are, and it's looking like this. And but for a human body, at least for in a human realm, right? But who knows? There could be all kinds of realms and all kinds of life forms that we are not even aware of. But it's all, the source is the same no matter what realm you're in or what world you're in and where we go after we die, or if we go anywhere. Whatever source will always be the same.
Well, that's what I'm proposing there, that the source, the light of being, the eternal light, is always there. We can use nothingness in different ways. I mean, these are abstract terms. So nothingness, from this perspective of the spiritual path, nothingness indicates the absence of the ego, so that when there's the death of the ego, there's actually fullness, and there's the fullness of the presence of being. So when I negate all that I am not, what remains is what I am, and that is full. So that nothingness, that negation, leads to perfect fullness. But it's a little abstract, but when I was just saying about the God hypothesis, that fullness, that presence is the ultimate reality. The presence of God. God is the ultimate reality. I even propose an answer in the first book to why there is something rather than nothing, but it's too abstract to go in here, I think, go into.
Yeah, but the nice thing is that every human being or every sentient being, everything, the universe, it's that light of consciousness, and it's what we actually are. You can be in your heart and you can know that fullness for yourself, know that love, know that peace.
Yeah, it could be said that the organism, that the soul, whatever, is pulling you there, because everyone wants to be at peace. Everyone wants to be happy. And so there's a pull, because it's like balance. You want to be balanced. You want the feeling of wellness that comes with being balanced or in the heart. And so that is, you're always being pulled towards balance. When you lose your balance, you say, no, 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 this doesn't feel right. And so you try to correct. And so finding the heart is just about correcting and going back to the place where you have been pulled to all along. But again, often we don't pay attention to it. We pay attention to the other things, thinking that that will provide that fullness. Now, Ramana Maharshi and others will say that the pursuit of desire is really an attempt to reach the self. Because if I have a desire and I attain the desire, then I'm without desire in that moment. I've attained my desire. I wanted to buy this book. It comes from Amazon, and I'm without desire. And so I come back to that state of stillness, but I don't recognize that it's a state of stillness that provides the feeling of wellness, not the object that I desired. Not attaining that object. Attaining that object quenches the desire until another desire arises, but it's that state of being free of desire, quenched of desire, that I've returned to myself. The agitation of the desire has subsided, and I'm back to myself. And we attribute that happiness to the object, but it really is the inherent state when the desire is quenched, when the desire subsides. And I'm back to myself.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're full in yourself. That's why you're full. The other is only temporary and it will never fulfill you. Yeah. So the seeking out there is never going to fulfill you, but seeking, or not even seeking inwards, but be who you are, like be that stillness, go there all the time. And then that fullness, you'll see it for yourself.
Yes, that stillness is what you're looking for. It's yourself. All of the agitation, the desire, the outward going mind, the mind turned outwardly, paying attention to outer things creates agitation. We think that if we obtain something from the outer world, then we will be happy, but it's really when we obtain it because the agitation subsides. And Ramana Maharshi again uses deep sleep as a metaphor. In deep sleep, you're completely at peace. You've sunk into yourself. There's no mind. There's no agitation. You're completely at peace. And it's not because you've obtained anything from the world. It's not because your desires have been fulfilled. It's because you're without desire. And that deep sleep is a metaphor for self-realization. That level of stillness, non-desire in the waking state is a metaphor for self-realization. Just be still and you're full. You're full from within, as in deep sleep. You don't require anything because there's no agitation.
Yeah, that deep sleep, just completely peace, and there are no thoughts in deep sleep, at least. Yeah, those are gone. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned Four Noble Truths earlier. So the cause of suffering, according to the second noble truth, is craving. I've been using the word agitation. It's the same. So we could go very quickly through the Four Noble Truths. There's suffering, but the cause of suffering is craving or agitation or wanting, busyness. But there's an end to suffering, nirvana, and there's a path to the end of suffering. The path involves quelling the craving, quelling the agitation. When the agitation subsides, then you come back to the state of the absence of suffering, relief from suffering.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. So, and maybe we can finish with the metaphor in your book also about the tree, all the leaves and branches and how they come in the trunk, and or how they are connected to the trunk.
Yeah, I use that metaphor a lot. It's a good metaphor. I use it with patients a lot. I think it conveys the idea that the canopy of the tree has many branches. One branch leads to another, that leads to another. It's all very complex. That's the mind. The mind has one thought leads to another, that leads to another. I have thoughts about this subject, thoughts about that subject. But if you trace any branch to its source, you come to the same place, which is the trunk. So if you trace any thought to its origin, any thought or story to its origin, you come to the same place, which is the I sensibility, the sensibility of I am. So I am precedes all of the thoughts and stories. So people get embroiled in samsara when they climb out on one branch or another. They tell themselves a story, and returning to peace is retreating back to the source, the trunk, the source of the thought, which is the trunk, just the sensibility of being, of I amness. And that's a metaphor for Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry. When a thought arises, rather than follow the thought, rather than climb out onto the branch, ask yourself, well, what's the source of the thought? To whom does this appear? And you come back to the sense of being before there is a thought, story, dilemma, limitation, or definition. It's just the pure sense of being, which has no qualification, just the simplicity and immediacy of mere being. That's the trunk of the tree.
Yeah.
That's also the heart. You could say that the heart of the tree in this metaphor is the trunk. It's the source from which all of the thoughts extend.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. And what was your website?
My website is solomonkatz.com. It's pretty simple. I did it myself. I'm not good at it. But it's solomonkatz.com.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Solomon.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate you inviting me twice now. It's a great gift. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your wisdom. And I was like, oh yeah, the wisdom of silence. I was like, I have to interview you. So thank you for being here again. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Susan.